Pink Floyd. Uttering that designation immediately brings to mind for most music enthusiasts towering sonic tapestries and instantly recognizable imagery. The cryptic jacket of Dark Side of the Moon, the fiery handshake tableau from Wish You Were Here, inflatable swine hovering over industrial complexes, and the imposing rampart of The Wall. This is the Pink Floyd known for profound conceptual frameworks, meticulous sonic sculpting, and live presentations that soared beyond mere concerts into all-encompassing immersive experiences. They stand as colossi of the progressive rock genre, highly skilled architects of complex sonic environments and expansive musical narratives. However, as any analyst seeking the underlying essence understands, it's crucial to venture beyond the established canon. The nascent phase of a band, particularly one that underwent such significant transformation as Pink Floyd, holds vital clues about its fundamental identity and future trajectory, details frequently obscured by the mists of time and the predominant attention given to subsequent more renowned releases. And to uncover one of the master keys for comprehending the intellect that would, to a considerable degree, shape the band's destiny for decades, one must excavate deep within their inaugural album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, unveiled in 1967, a record still predominantly influenced by the dreamlike and fractured perspective of Syd Barrett. Piper serves as a testament to the zenith of British psychedelia, a plunge into a realm populated by lysergic fairy tales, vivid palettes, and a warped innocence only the idiosyncratic brilliance of Syd Barrett could possibly conceive. It is the repository for tracks such as Astronomy Damen, Interstellar Overdrive, and Bike. Nevertheless, tucked away amongst the sprites and pixies, resides a particular piece that stands out as an anomaly, a jarring foretaste of harsher realities and darker motifs that the group, and specifically one of its members, would embrace in later years. It is a selection that casual listeners often skip over or dismiss merely as just another quirk from the Syd era. I am referring to Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, credited solely to Roger Waters, the bassist and a founding member. This marks Waters' initial solo composition to appear on a Pink Floyd record, and within this nascent and frequently disregarded track, we unearth the thematic and even sonic germs that would blossom into the grand conceptual epics that came to define the ensemble. Intimate glimpses into Waters' creative origins that the glossy finish of subsequent records rarely allows us to perceive with such unvarnished rawness. An audition of Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk constitutes a deliberately uncomfortable and abrasive encounter, contrasting sharply with the melancholic delicacy of other tracks featured on the same album. It commences with a piercing, sustained guitar feedback, a pure sonic disturbance designed as a disquieting call for attention. Following this, the ensemble establishes a repetitive and hypnotic rhythmic underpinning constructed around Waters' insistent bass riff, Barrett's sporadic and discordant guitar lines, and Nick Mason's agitated and unpredictable drumming. But the most prominent element, the defining component of the unease pervading the atmosphere, is the deployment of Rick Wright's organ. Far removed from the ethereal and melodious textures he would delve into on other parts of Piper and in later albums, here Wright employs the instrument to generate sheer dissonance, intentionally clashing chords, sonic configurations that conjure a sensation of disorder and anxiety, almost akin to a mechanical, morbid lament hovering above the unyielding rhythmic foundation. The piece's structure similarly deviates from the conventional. There is no identifiable refrain, nor a clear verse-chorus bridge architecture. The track progresses in ascending spirals of intensity, with recurring rhythmic sections giving way to moments of seemingly controlled chaos, where the instruments appear to grapple amongst themselves before reverting to the foundation. Upon this unsettling sonic landscape, Roger Waters delivers or semi-sings his verses in an urgent and almost feverish manner. The vocal delivery prioritizes not melody, but rather the conveyance of a disturbing account, a visceral depiction of a bleak environment or psychological state. This vocal and structural approach already signaled, as early as 1967, Waters' inclination towards utilizing music as a conveyance for expressing ideas and emotions more directly, and with less concern for aesthetic norms than his bandmates at the time, particularly Syd. The lyrics, despite their seemingly straightforward descriptive nature, contain the deepest and most revealing layers of the track for the discerning listener. Explicit mentions such as Bed 22, lung disease, a spinal disease, paint a grim tableau of a hospital setting, of sickness and physical confinement. The atmosphere is oppressive and fraught with vulnerability. Nevertheless, The crucial detail, the interpretative pivot point that most casual listeners overlook, resides within the title itself. Take up thy stethoscope and walk. This phrase is a clear and deliberate inversion of a fundamental biblical passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verse 8, where Jesus, in healing a paralytic man at the pool of Bethesda, instructs him, "Rise, take up your bed, and walk." The action of taking up one's bed and walking stands as the ultimate symbol of recovery, of overcoming affliction, and the restoration of mobility and liberation. Waters subverts this image of healing and emancipation in a startling fashion. Instead of the afflicted person who, having been cured, takes the symbol of their immobility, the bed, and walks, it is the figure of medical authority who is placed in prominence. It is the physician, with their stethoscope, an instrument of diagnosis, a symbol of power and control over the patient's condition, who walks, who moves, who imposes their presence or their perspective. This reversal of roles, the confined invalid and the medical practitioner whose instrument walks, hints at a nascent critique of institutional authority, be it medical, societal, or any form of power that diagnoses, constrains, and perhaps perpetuates a state of helplessness or imprisonment, rather than genuinely healing or liberating. It functions as a somber commentary on the dynamic between those who possess the power to determine the condition of others and those whose state is determined by that assessment. The point of tension for the listener who approaches Pink Floyd via their subsequent albums lies precisely in this thematic selection and such an early, explicit symbolic inversion. Why would Roger Waters, in his inaugural solo contribution to a band album, opt for such a weighty subject matter and such a specific subversion of a biblical image of recovery? Amidst the psychedelic flora and cosmic folklore of Barrett's contributions, Waters thrusts sickness, confinement, and veiled criticism of authority into the foreground. There is nothing escapist about it. There is a direct confrontation with painful reality. This choice reveals, from 1967 onwards, a sensitivity radically different from Sid's and points towards a mind that observed the world not with wonder and fantasy, but with a blend of skepticism, distress, and a sharp perception of the power structures that shape human experience. The precise origin of this inspiration, was it a personal brush with illness or hospitals, a broad social observation regarding healthcare systems, or a metaphor for a more profound existential unease, lingers as a question without a definitive answer, rendering the piece even more enigmatic and challenging for anyone attempting to decipher it. A challenge that invites speculation and a search for clues in his biography and the band's chronicle. DCU. Music itself operates as an extension and amplification of the lyrical message. The deliberate choice of constant dissonance in Wright's organ is not merely a psychedelic flourish. It serves as a sonic depiction of the discomfort, the physical or mental disorder that the lyrics evoke. The rhythmic repetition is not solely hypnotic. It can be construed as the vicious cycle of affliction, the monotony of constraint, or the relentless march of a system that holds one captive. The moments of sonic turmoil in the central section might symbolize the struggle against infirmity, or the sensation of losing control. The overall harshness of the sound, lacking the polish of later productions, reinforces the feeling of rawness, of something exposed and vulnerable, akin to a diseased body. The band is not merely performing the piece, they are externalizing state of mind, a sense of urgency and oppression. This capacity to employ the very structure of the sound and the performance to articulate abstract concepts and emotions, even in this nascent and experimental phase, stands as one of Pink Floyd's hallmarks and is manifest here in a particularly palpable manner. A crucial historical detail that Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk unveils, and one that is frequently underestimated, is what its inclusion on the debut record signifies for Pink Floyd's internal dynamic at that specific juncture. The Piper, At the Gates of Dawn, is rightly considered Syd Barrett's album, the documented record of his eccentric genius which regrettably proved ephemeral. Nevertheless, the presence of this track, credited solely to Waters, marks the initial instance where another Pink Floyd member distinguishes themselves on the album with an entirely original composition, presenting an authorial voice and a thematic focus that were distinctly different from Barrett's. It was not simply another song on the record. It represented Roger Waters' inaugural solo declaration within the band's context, the first clear indication that a second, significant creative force existed with a radically distinct worldview. While Syd gazed at the constellations and childhood memories, Roger directed his attention towards the maladies of society and the human psyche. This coexistence of such disparate visions on the same album, and the position of this track, as the first manifestation of Waters' sensibility, constitutes a fundamental historical detail for comprehending Pink Floyd's eventual and dramatic shift following Barrett's departure, a transition that most devotees only recognize retrospectively in the subsequent albums, but whose seed was sown here, clearly visible to those who know where to look. The backdrop of the track's recording, while not replete with colorful anecdotes like some of the album's other pieces, similarly offers insights. Pink Floyd recorded Piper at Abbey Road Studios, the era's sanctuary of polished pop sonics, under the guidance of producer Norman Smith, a sound engineer who had worked extensively with the Beatles and was accustomed to a more conventional and arranged sound. Smith frequently found himself exasperated by Pink Floyd's experimental and unpredictable methodology, attempting to capture the controlled harshness of the initial feedback, the calculated liberty of the central section, and the intense dissonance of Wright's organ within an environment oriented towards refinement must have presented a considerable challenge. The final sonic output of the track, relatively straightforward, raw, devoid of excessive studio effects that could have masked its intensity, can be perceived as a reflection of this tension between the band's approach and the producers, or perhaps as Smith's acceptance that the nature of the music demanded such rawness. This production detail, subtle to the casual listener, amplifies the feeling of discomfort and brutal realism that the music aims to convey. Let us also consider the role that "Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk" likely held in Pink Floyd's live performances during that early period. The band, before becoming renowned for their meticulously choreographed visual spectaculars, built a substantial portion of their live reputation around lengthy and exploratory sonic improvisations, with its repetitive rhythmic bass and its central section open to controlled chaos. This track provided a perfect vehicle for such real-time exploration. Imagining the band extending Wright's dissonant organ section, or delving into unpredictable variations upon Waters' bass riff on stage, reinforces the notion that this piece was not merely a studio experiment, but a selection that fit seamlessly into Pink Floyd's initial performative DNA, a DNA that valued sonic intensity, textural exploration, and the creation of immersive atmospheres, even if they were uncomfortable ones, long before elaborate staging became prominent. This phase, where sound was the primary experience, is vital for understanding the band's evolution. The sense of anticipation and unresolved inquiry that this track inspires in the listener who discovers and comprehends it is potent, knowing that this music, with its themes of affliction, institutional critique, and existential unease, represents Roger Waters' first solo expression on a Pink Floyd album. What more can we uncover by revisiting the band's entire vast and rich discography? With this fresh perspective, how did this germ planted in 1967 mature and transform into the complex narratives of Animals, the dissection of alienation in The Wall, the meditations on loss and absence in Wish You Were Here? Are there echoes of this dissonance, this subversion of authority, this sense of being trapped within the lyrics and sonic character of later works? The answer, for those who embark on this investigation, is a resounding yes. The music becomes an invitation to a voyage of rediscovery, to trace the threads that link the initial creative turbulence of Piper to the calculated order, and frequently equally disquieting, of the albums that catapulted Pink Floyd to global phenomenon status. It transforms the act of listening into an exercise in musical archaeology, seeking the footprints left by Waters from the very outset of his journey as the band's principal lyrical and conceptual architect. The initial critical reception of the Piper at the Gates of Dawn primarily centered on the eccentric genius of Syd Barrett, and the tracks that were more overtly psychedelic and pop-oriented. Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, with its harshness and unconventional subject matter, was likely perceived by many contemporary critics as merely another oddity from the band, without adequate comprehension of its long-term significance. Its importance as the first intimation of Waters' voice, as the thematic bedrock that would underpin a substantial portion of Pink Floyd's future output, was only fully acknowledged and analyzed by dedicated scholars and enthusiasts retrospectively as the band's career unfolded and the centrality of Waters' themes became undeniable. This disparity between the initial reception and subsequent analysis is another aspect of what nobody tells you about this particular piece. Its relevance lay concealed within the subtext of the future, awaiting revelation by the passage of time and retrospective perspective. In hindsight, Roger Waters rarely speaks in detail about Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk in interviews, Nevertheless, the persistence of the themes introduced here, affliction, critique of institutions, educational, political, military, medical, psychological fragility, and the quest for a form of liberation or recovery that power structures appear to impede throughout his entire body of work, both within Pink Floyd and his solo career, serves as the most eloquent testament that this track was not a mere isolated experiment. It represented the first public manifestation of a creative intellect profoundly concerned with the ailments of the individual and society, and resolved to employ music as a tool to explore and, in a sense, exorcise these internal demons. The rawness and urgency of the track seem to mirror the intensity with which these matters already resonated within Waters in 1967. Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk transcends its position as an obscure and sonically challenging piece on Pink Floyd's inaugural album. It functions as an indispensable historical document, Roger Waters' initial and raw solo declaration, a somber and potent foreshadowing of the themes that would ultimately define his career and Pink Floyd's most iconic phase. Stands as proof that, even amidst the explosion of color and fantasy characteristic of Syd Barrett's psychedelia, a force already existed within the band regarding the world, with incisive skepticism, dissecting power structures and human vulnerability with a frankness shocking for the era. Its dissonance, its atypical arrangement, its unsettling verses all point towards the depth and complexity that the band, under Waters' leadership, would fully embrace. To overlook this composition is to neglect a fundamental piece of the Pink Floyd puzzle, a vital link connecting the initial creative turmoil to the epic narratives that, years later, would reshape the landscape of rock music. For the fan familiar solely with the major hits, this track offers an invitation to attentive listening, a dive into an uncomfortable but profoundly rewarding sound, one that illuminates the history and evolution of one of the greatest ensembles of all time in an unexpected and captivating manner. It serves as a forceful reminder that the foundations, even the most discordant and less accessible ones, are indispensable for comprehending the entirety of the final structure. It speaks to us not merely about an ailment in bed 22, it speaks to the societal disease that Waters perceived, and which he would spend the remainder of his remarkable career dissecting, commencing right here, with his stethoscope in hand, and walking. If you found yourself engrossed by this examination of the lesser-known corners of Pink Floyd's history and the manner in which a single, seemingly peripheral track can carry such significant weight for understanding the trajectory and identity of such an influential group, then the realm of progressive rock and its concealed narratives is precisely for you. There exists a vast expanse of albums, compositions, and historical junctures awaiting unveiling, revealing layers of meaning that immensely enrich the act of experiencing music. To continue this journey of discovery, delving deeper into the nuances that defined progressive rock and the captivating history of monumental bands, we extend an invitation to explore the Rock e Experiencia Prague channel. There, we delve profoundly into the concepts, the compositions, and the historical context that rendered progressive rock unparalleled, with the same degree of depth, rigor, and accessibility you encountered within this text. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications to be alerted about new content, and explore the extensive collection of videos already available. Come expand your Prague experience with us and uncover what nobody told you about the music you cherish.
Comfortably Numb represents a climax both within the narrative of The Wall and in terms of the artistic collaboration between Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Concluding the third act of this conceptual work, this song plays a decisive role in the album's storyline. It is here that Pink's metamorphosis takes place, under the influence of an unknown substance with strange powers, which is injected into him by a physician. This is his confrontation with the doctor, as Roger Waters puts it to Tommy Vance, and indeed, the doctor was the song's working title. Shut away in his hotel room, Pink has failed to respond to either the repeated banging on his door at the end of the previous song, Bring the Boys Back Home, or his manager's persistent attempts to make him see sense, given that the concert is fast approaching. Time to go. All to no avail. Enter a physician who asks, "Hello, is there anybody in there?" a question that echoes the song, "Is there anybody out there?" His offer to ease the rock star's pain is clearly full of significance. It seems that Roger Waters's description of Pink's mental deterioration in this song was inspired by a real-life incident that occurred in the summer of 1967. During the International Love-In Festival, Mark Bolan's wife discovered Syd Barrett in such a serious cataleptic state that he was unable to recognize her. Aware of the seconds ticking away, the stage manager started panicking and shouting, "Time to go! Time to go," exactly as Pink's manager, who also bangs on the hotel room door, does at the end of "Bring the Boys Back Home." Although Barrett was eventually led onto the stage, he was present in body only that evening and was unable to support the other three members of the group. Roger Waters and David Gilmour share the lead vocal in "Comfortably Numb." The verses are sung by Roger Waters, playing the part of the physician, and the refrain by David Gilmour in the role of Pink. In Waters's sections, his voice is so fragile and dreamlike that one wonders whether he is trying to embody the drug and its effect on Pink's neurons. In the first refrain, Pink addresses the following words to the physician: "Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying." He is then plunged deep into his past and the memory of a fever that makes him feel comfortably numb. Is this an expression of the sense of paralysis we feel when we suddenly discover that our childhood has disappeared for good? Or is it a reference to Pink's possessive mother, as Alan Parker gives us to think in his movie, in which we see Pink marrying a rock chick, out of love perhaps, but more likely to escape from the web his mother has woven around him in order to protect him from the outside world. The physician then administers an injection with the aim of getting Pink through the show. Pink's plunge into the past continues until the end of the last refrain. Waters has revealed that this passage derives from an experience he had had a few years before. "I was in Philadelphia. I had terrible stomach pains. I can't remember exactly when it was, but this idiot said, 'Oh, I can deal with that,' and gave me an injection of some kind. God knows what it was, but I went, sound of hitting floor." He adds that the 2 hours that followed were the longest 2 hours in his life as he was incapable of playing or moving his arms during the concert. The message is clear. Waters is targeting the world of entertainment, and rock and roll in particular, where money takes precedence over everything else, with no regard to the physical or mental health of those paid to go on stage. It is also a frontal attack on an economic model based on profit. Open season on the money men, in a sense. From a musical point of view, Comfortably Numb is universally recognized as a Pink Floyd masterpiece and as a perfect example of Gilmour's melodic subtlety combined with Waters's dark poetry. This song is David Gilmour's main contribution to The Wall, in the capacity of composer at least. Comfortably Numb is one of the rare tracks on the album that starts with neither sound effect nor segue. David Gilmour explains the genesis of the song. "I actually recorded a demo of Comfortably Numb at Bear Les Alpes while I was doing my first solo album, but it was only a basic little chord pattern which was really not much else," he explains. In the end, the guitarist did not have time to include it on his solo album, and put it to one side. It was only much later, at the insistence of Bob Ezrin, who was extremely keen for Gilmour to contribute to the writing of The Wall, that he returned to it. James Guthrie remembers, "The day that he turned up with Comfortably Numb, sang a la-la melody over the top of these chords, was fantastic." Ezrin then asked Waters to write the words. Waters did so, but with little enthusiasm, according to Ezrin. When he reappeared with the finished lyric, the producer was full of admiration, and has called the song text one of the greatest ever written. Although there was no dispute about the authorship of the words, the same cannot be said of the music. Gilmour has subsequently maintained throughout many an interview that his collaboration with Waters on this track amounted to "my music," his words, claiming that Waters had asked him to adapt his music to the length of his lines, thereby forcing him to change the structure of the piece. However, Roger Waters would dispute this version of events, which in his opinion is too black and white. "What happened is Dave gave me a chord sequence, so if you wanted to fight about it I could say that I wrote the melody and the lyrics, obviously. I think in the choruses he actually hummed a bit of the melody, but in the verses he certainly didn't." Listening to Gilmour's demo, it seems that Waters's memory had played tricks on him because the refrain and its melody were fully formed and only the verses remained vague. But as he himself would say, arguing about who did what at this point is kind of futile. Unfortunately, the disagreements between the two men were not confined to the songwriting. Other major bones of contention were the arrangements and mixing. Gilmour and Waters failed to see eye to eye on two main points. Firstly, the strings that Bob Ezrin had Michael Kamen arrange and record in New York City were judged by David Gilmour to be excessively syrupy. He wanted a more pared-down rock sound. However, the producer fought his corner and Roger Waters supported him. They sounded fantastic, almost the best thing that Michael ever did in my view. I loved it. The second area of dispute concerned the drum part recorded by Nick Mason, which the guitarist considered slapdash. We had another go at it and I thought that the second take was better. Gilmour then reworked the song and took it upon himself to present a new version that he now considered perfect, but Waters did not like it at all, and that was the big argument. Each of them justified his own vision of the song forcefully, conceding nothing. Gilmour, for his part, wanting to defend at all costs one of the very few titles he had written for the album. They would describe this sparring as no less than a battle. Finally, in the light of their respective stubbornness, they reached a compromise, so the song ended up with 4 bars of his and 4 bars of mine. The whole track is like that. It was a weird sort of bargaining thing between he and I. The most distressing thing about this whole episode is that both Gilmour and Waters have since admitted that they are unable to hear the difference between the rejected versions and the version used in the end. It was more an ego thing than anything else, Gilmour would admit in 1993. Musically, Comfortably Numb opens with 4 bars consisting of the brass conducted by Michael Kamen, a pedal steel guitar played by David Gilmour, a sonority that had been absent in Pink Floyd's music since Wish You Were Here, Rick Wright's Hammond organ, Roger Waters's bass, and Nick Mason's drumming. Roger Waters has awarded himself the lead vocal in all the verses, singing in a drawling voice and a patronizing, paternalistic tone in keeping with the character of the shady Dr. Feelgood. The first syllables of each verse are repeated by a very present echo, creating the impression that they are reverberating in Pink's befuddled head. David Gilmour in turn takes the lead vocal in the refrains, supported by his Ovation custom legend, in Nashville tuning, as on Hey You, a second acoustic rhythm part, this time played by Lee Ritenour, and the superb strings orchestrated and conducted by Michael Kamen, one of the areas of disagreement. At the end of the first refrain, Gilmour plays one of the song's 2 guitar solos on his Black Strat, with big muff distortion and colored by Yamaha rotary speaker. His touch is as brilliant, and his performance as inspired, as ever. Roger Waters sings lead vocal in 3 more verses before Gilmour returns for the final refrain. After his last phrase he launches into his second solo, which remains one of the highlights of his career as a guitarist. He would explain that he recorded it relatively quickly, in 5 or 6 takes. From there I just followed my usual procedure, which is to listen back to each solo and mark out bar lines, saying which bits are good. Having identified the most successful passages, all that remained to do was to bring the faders up and down for each of the tracks used in order to arrive at a single, polished solo. That's the way we did it on Comfortably Numb. It wasn't that difficult, he would conclude. The results are breathtaking. Gilmour surpasses himself in the intensity of his performance, his black Strat thundering through his high-watt amp, colored by Yamaha rotary speaker and big muff. This solo would go down in the annals of music history, among other things being voted 4th best rock solo of all time by the magazine Guitar World. Supporting the guitarist are Mason with a very good drum part and Wright on organ. It is highly likely that Gilmour is also playing bass in this section, given that the style is substantially more aggressive than that of Waters. He is also on the Prophet 5 and playing distorted rhythm guitar. Guthrie has explained that during mixing there was a Nick Mason drum fill he wanted to change. As the Ludwig had been recorded on a 16-track machine that was synchronized with the 24-track, there was no question of tampering with the master tape. He therefore decided to perform a window edit, a trick he had heard about, although never actually tried himself. This involved cutting out the top part of the 16-track tape corresponding to the 8 drum tracks, and replacing it with another section pulled from a satisfactory take. Armed with a razor blade, he performed the maneuver skillfully, carefully inserted the section of tape in question, and switched on the 2 machines. The operation was a complete success.